70 days. No sunlight, no phone calls, no escape. 155 souls, sealed inside 560 feet of steel, patrolling 1,000 feet below the surface, where one mistake means everyone dies. The USS Ohio, at 18,750 tons, the U.S. Navy's biggest nuclear submarine, is a silent leviathan that can end civilizations without ever being seen. But here's what they don't tell you. What happens when someone gets appendicitis 3 weeks into patrol? How do they communicate orders without giving away their position to enemy subs hunting them? What are the actual protocols when something goes catastrophically wrong in the deep? Former crew members have started talking, and the answers aren't what you'd expect. The USS Ohio doesn't just disappear beneath the waves, it vanishes from existence entirely. At 560 feet long and displacing 18,750 tons submerged, this is the largest submarine the United States has ever built, longer than the Washington Monument laid on its side, heavier than 6 Statue of Liberties. The lead ship of its class, commissioned in 1981, Ohio represents the most sophisticated marriage of stealth and apocalyptic firepower ever conceived. As an SSGN, a ballistic missile submarine, it once carried 24 Trident II D5 missiles, each capable of delivering up to 12 independently targetable nuclear warheads over 7,500 miles. Think about that. One boat, enough firepower to reshape continents. But Ohio's story took a turn. In 2002, the Navy pulled it into conversion. 4 Ohio-class boats, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, Georgia, were transformed from nuclear bombers into something arguably more versatile, SSGNs, guided missile submarines. Ohio's 24 missile tubes now carry 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles across 22 tubes, plus 2 tubes converted into lockout chambers for Navy SEALs and unmanned underwater vehicles. It became a Swiss Army knife of maritime warfare. Precision strikes, special operations insertion, intelligence gathering, all while maintaining that same terrifying ability to operate for months without anyone knowing where it is. The engineering is staggering. The S8G pressurized water reactor generates 60,000 shaft horsepower, enough to push this behemoth past 20 knots underwater. The reactor doesn't need refueling for over 15 years. Read that again, 15 years. No gas stations at depth. No surfacing for supplies beyond food. The Ohio class can theoretically stay submerged indefinitely, limited only by how much food you can cram into the storage compartments and how long the crew can psychologically endure the isolation. And that crew? 155 people, 15 officers, 140 enlisted. That's it. In a vessel the size of a football field laid vertically, you'd expect more bodies. But submarines don't scale like surface ships. Every cubic foot is accounted for. Every person has multiple jobs. Everyone knows that if something goes wrong at patrol depth, between 800 and 1,000 feet down, though the Navy won't confirm the exact operational ceiling, there's no calling for backup. You are backup. You are hospital. You are firefighter and damage control and rescue team all at once. Here's the question nobody asks until they're standing on the pier watching Ohio submerge. How do these people actually live down there? Not survive. Live. For 70, 80, 90 days at a stretch. With zero sunlight, zero privacy, zero connection to the surface world. When someone snaps a bone, when someone's tooth abscesses, when the reactor alarm screams at 3 in the morning and you're 3 weeks from the nearest port, what happens then? The Navy classifies most of it. Emergency protocols, communication methods, medical procedures. They'll tell you Ohio is the most survivable weapons platform ever built, that compartmentalization ensures damage in one section won't sink the boat. They'll cite the redundant systems, the training cycles, the selection process that weeds out anyone who can't handle the pressure, literal and psychological. But they won't tell you what it feels like. Former crew members describe it differently. One sailor put it simply, you learn to live in a steel tube with 150 guys. No windows, no weather. Just you and the hum of the reactor and the knowledge that outside that hull is enough pressure to crush you into paste. That's the world we're about to enter. Not the sanitized Navy press release version. The real version, where human beings push the limits of what's possible in the most hostile environment on Earth. Let's talk about space, or the complete lack of it. The Ohio is 560 feet long, yes, but only 42 feet across at the widest point. Now subtract the pressure hull thickness, several inches of HY80 steel designed to withstand the crushing weight of the ocean. Subtract the missile tubes running down the center of the boat, each one 44 feet tall and over 7 feet in diameter. Subtract the reactor compartment, the engine room, the control room, the galley, the torpedo room. What's left for 155 people to actually live in? Not much. Hot racking. That's the term. 3 sailors assigned to 2 bunks. You work 8 hours, sleep 8 hours in a coffin-sized rack, then rotate out so the next guy can sleep in sheets still warm from your body heat. The racks are stacked 3 high in some berthing areas, so close together you can't sit up without hitting the bunk above you. You sleep on your side. Always. Because there's no room to roll over without your shoulder hitting metal. Privacy doesn't exist. The head, submarine speak for bathroom, is shared by dozens of men. Showers are rationed. 3 minutes, maybe. If the evaporators are producing enough fresh water that day. If not, you skip. The smell in the berthing areas after week 3 of a patrol is indescribable. Laundry cycles can't keep up. Deodorant only masks so much. You stop noticing after a while. Your nose gives up. But here's what hits harder than the cramped quarters: the psychological weight of being cut off. When Ohio dives, it goes silent. Radio silence isn't just protocol, it's survival. Broadcasting signals means enemy subs can triangulate your position. So for weeks, sometimes months, you receive almost nothing from the surface world. No phone calls, no emails, no "your wife had the baby" messages, unless command deems it critical enough to risk a transmission. You exist in a bubble where time loses meaning because every day is identical. Fluorescent lights. The same 155 faces. The same recycled air tasting faintly metallic from the CO2 scrubbers working overtime. One former officer described it. You'd lie in your rack at night. Well, night doesn't exist, but you know what I mean, and think about sunlight. Just yellow sunlight on your face. You'd forget what it felt like. That messes with your head more than you'd think. Now layer medical emergencies onto that isolation. The USS Ohio has a corpsman, not a doctor. A corpsman, essentially a highly trained paramedic with some surgical knowledge. That's your entire medical staff for 155 people over 90 days. The medical bay is a converted storage closet. 1 exam table, basic surgical equipment, enough morphine and antibiotics to handle infections and pain management. But if someone ruptures an appendix, if someone has a heart attack, if a machinist slices an artery in the engine room, the corpsman does what he can. One former crewman told the story of a sailor who smashed his hand between 2 hatches during a drill. Bones shattered, blood everywhere. The doc, they all call the corpsman Doc, stabilized him in the wardroom because medical didn't have space for the procedure. Stitched him up on the same table where officers ate breakfast. No anesthesia beyond local. No second opinion. Just training, improvisation, and the hope that infection doesn't set in before the patrol ends. Medevac is theoretically possible. The boat can surface. A helicopter can attempt a transfer in calm seas. But surfacing means breaking patrol, giving away your position, potentially compromising the mission. So the calculation becomes, is this sailor's life worth the strategic risk? Most times, the answer is no. Most times, you treat and pray. Communication poses its own nightmare. The Ohio needs to receive orders, changes to patrol routes, targeting updates, emergency action messages. But at depth, normal radio frequencies can't penetrate seawater. High-frequency radio waves stop dead within feet of the surface. You need extremely low-frequency transmissions, VLF radio, which can reach submarines hundreds of feet down. The problem? VLF is one-way, extremely slow data rate, and it requires the sub to trail a buoy or antenna near the surface while moving, which is detectable. So most of the time, Ohio stays deep and silent, completely isolated. If the crew needs to send a message, say a critical equipment failure or a medical emergency requiring guidance, they have to make a choice: risk exposure or handle it alone. They almost always handle it alone. The ocean itself is the other enemy. At operational depth, let's conservatively say 800 feet, since the Navy won't confirm, the pressure outside the hull is roughly 350 pounds per square inch. For context, a car tire is 32 psi. A small leak becomes a water jet that can slice through flesh like a blade. A catastrophic hull breach means the compartment floods in seconds, the pressure equalizes instantly, and everyone inside is crushed or drowned, before they can register what's happening. The crew drills for this: fire, flooding, reactor casualties, loss of propulsion. They drill until their hands move on muscle memory alone, because when the alarm sounds, there's no time to think. One former chief described it: you train until you're sick of training, and then when something actually goes wrong, you're grateful you trained that much, because your brain turns off and your hands just do. But training only goes so far when you're sealed in a steel cylinder 1,000 feet beneath the Pacific, and the nearest help is 12 hours away, if they even know you're in trouble. So how does Ohio actually do it? How does a 560-foot submarine carrying 155 people stay submerged for 3 months without surfacing, without resupply, without anyone on the outside even knowing it still exists? The answer is nuclear fire. Controlled, relentless, and absolutely essential. At the heart of Ohio sits the S8G pressurized water reactor, a generation of nuclear propulsion technology that makes everything else possible. Here's the elegant simplicity. Nuclear fission heats water to over 500 degrees Fahrenheit under pressure so intense it can't boil. That superheated water flows through a heat exchanger, transferring thermal energy to a secondary water loop, which flashes to steam. Steam drives turbines. Turbines generate 60,000 shaft horsepower, spinning the propeller and generating electricity for every system on board. The steam condenses back to water, gets reheated, and the cycle repeats, endlessly. No combustion, no air required, no fuel stops for over 15 years. Think about what that means. Every surface ship burns fuel, which means it needs air for combustion, which means it has limited range and must periodically refuel. Ohio doesn't. The reactor provides unlimited power as long as the uranium fuel is viable. That's why Ohio can stay down for months. It's not limited by propulsion. It's limited by food and sanity. But power solves only one problem. Stealth solves the other. The Ohio class was designed during the Cold War under one guiding principle: Soviet subs cannot be allowed to find and kill our boomers before they launch, which meant Ohio needed to become a ghost. Noise is the enemy of submarine stealth. Propellers cavitate, creating bubbles that collapse and generate sound. Machinery vibrates. Hull plating transmits impact noise. Every decibel radiated into the water is a potential death sentence. So Ohio's designers isolated everything. The propulsion system sits on massive shock-absorbing mounts, decoupling it from the hull. The hull itself uses anechoic tiles, rubber coatings that absorb sonar pings instead of reflecting them. The propeller is a highly classified design engineered to minimize cavitation at speed. Even the crew is trained in ultra-quiet protocols during sensitive operations. No dropping tools, no slamming hatches, no running. You move through the boat like a ghost haunting its own ship. And then there's sonar. The ANBQ-10 V4 suite is Ohio's primary sense organ, a network of passive arrays that listen to the ocean without emitting a sound. The bow spherical array, a massive dome packed with hydrophones, detects everything from biologics to distant surface ships to enemy submarines. The TB-29A towed array deploys behind the boat on a cable, extending listening range even further. Ohio hears everything. It broadcasts nothing. This is how you hunt without being hunted. You become the ocean's most patient predator, drifting silently at depth, listening to the world above while remaining invisible. But stealth and power mean nothing if the crew can't breathe. Life support on a submarine is a constant battle against chemistry. 155 people exhaling CO2, equipment generating heat, limited air volume. Without intervention, the atmosphere would become toxic within hours. Ohio uses a combination of systems. Oxygen is stored in liquid form and released as needed, supplemented by electrolysis units that split seawater into hydrogen and oxygen. CO2 scrubbers use chemical reactions to remove carbon dioxide from the air. Atmospheric monitoring systems constantly measure oxygen, CO2, and trace contaminants, adjusting the mix to keep everyone alive. It works. Barely. The air always feels slightly stale, slightly wrong, but it keeps you conscious and functional. Navigation presents its own challenge. GPS requires satellite signals which don't penetrate seawater. Ohio can't surface to get a fix without risking detection. So it relies on inertial navigation systems, incredibly precise gyroscopes and accelerometers that track every movement, every turn, every acceleration. The boat knows where it is because it knows where it was and how it's moved since then. Ring laser gyros provide accuracy measured in meters over thousands of miles. When you put it all together, the reactor, the stealth tech, the sonar, the life support, the navigation, you realize Ohio isn't just a submarine. It's a self-contained world, a closed-loop ecosystem that generates its own power, breathes its own air, and navigates by dead reckoning in an environment where human senses are useless. But all that engineering brilliance still depends on one fragile element: the crew. And when something goes wrong with the crew, all the technology in the world won't save the mission. Which brings us back to the question, how do they actually handle emergencies? Let's start with communication. Because when you're at patrol depth and need to talk to the surface world, physics becomes your enemy. VLF radio, very low frequency, is the only method that penetrates seawater to meaningful depths. The US Navy operates massive VLF transmitters on shore, broadcasting at frequencies between 3 and 30 kilohertz. These signals can reach submarines at several hundred feet, though the data rate is glacially slow. We're talking characters per minute, not gigabits per second. An emergency action message, essentially a launch order, can take several minutes to fully receive and authenticate. Ohio trails a buoyant wire antenna when it needs to receive VLF. The wire floats toward the surface while the sub stays deep, maximizing reception while minimizing exposure. But it's still detectable if someone's looking, and it's one way. Ohio can listen, but broadcasting back requires either surfacing to periscope depth to use satellite communications or deploying a communications buoy, a small torpedo-like device, transmits a burst message, then sinks. Both options create detection risk. So for most of the patrol, Ohio is truly alone. No orders, no updates. Just the mission profile programmed before departure and the standing protocols every crew member has memorized. Medical crises follow a brutal triage logic. The corpsman, usually a Navy hospital corpsman with specialized submarine training, handles everything from dental emergencies to minor surgeries. He's equipped with a limited pharmacy: antibiotics, painkillers, anti-inflammatories, sedatives. He can stitch lacerations, set broken bones, pull infected teeth. He's trained in emergency procedures like cricothyrotomy, cutting a hole in someone's throat to establish an airway, because there's no anesthesiologist on board to intubate. One former corpsman described the reality. You're it. You're diagnostician, surgeon, nurse, and psychologist. A guy comes in with chest pain, and you're deciding if it's a heart attack or indigestion based on symptoms and intuition, because you don't have an EKG machine or a cardiologist on speed dial. You treat what you can, stabilize what you can't, and hope you make it back to port before someone dies on your watch. Serious cases trigger a calculus. Can the mission be compromised? If the answer is no, you treat and pray. If the answer is yes, and the patient is critical enough, the boat surfaces for medevac. But understand what that means. Breaking patrol potentially compromises the strategic mission, gives away the submarine's operating area, and risks the entire boat for one person. It happens, but rarely. Emergency protocols for equipment casualties remain largely classified, but the general principles are public knowledge. Ohio's hull is divided into multiple compartments with watertight doors and hatches. A catastrophic failure in one compartment, say a fire or flooding, can be isolated. The crew in that section fights the casualty while everyone else maintains the boat's operation. In the worst case, the compartment is sealed and abandoned, sacrificing those inside to save the boat. Fire is particularly terrifying on a submarine. Smoke has nowhere to go. The atmosphere you're breathing is the atmosphere that's now filling with toxic gases. Fire suppression systems use halon or CO2, which displaces oxygen, meaning you're not just fighting the fire, you're potentially suffocating the crew in that space. Standard procedure: emergency air breathing masks on immediately. Close ventilation. Isolate the compartment. Fight the fire until it's out, or seal the space and let it burn itself out in an oxygen-depleted environment. Flooding is somehow worse. A hull breach at depth means water entering at hundreds of pounds per square inch. It's not a leak, it's a projectile stream that can knock a man off his feet and cause traumatic injuries. The crew has seconds to identify the breach, shore it with damage control equipment, and restore watertight integrity before the compartment is lost. If they fail, the compartment floods completely. The sub loses buoyancy in that section, and the boat starts sinking. The emergency blow system, high-pressure air that forces water out of ballast tanks, can bring Ohio to the surface in a crisis, but it's a last resort. Blowing tanks is loud, detectable, and often means the boat is too damaged to dive again. It's the submarine equivalent of ejecting from a fighter jet. You survive, but the mission is over. Reactor casualties follow protocols so rehearsed that every crew member can recite them from memory. Reactor scrams, emergency shutdowns, happen for various reasons: coolant system anomalies, power spikes, sensor failures. The reactor shuts down automatically, backup systems kick in, and the engineering crew works to diagnose and restore power. Until then, Ohio runs on battery power alone, which gives you hours, not days. The clock starts ticking. Fix the reactor or surface. Navigation without external references requires constant vigilance. The inertial navigation system is recalibrated using celestial navigation during brief periscope depth excursions, but drift accumulates. A few meters per day doesn't sound like much until you've been submerged for 80 days and you're now off by a quarter mile. Sonar provides some environmental references, underwater mountains, known wrecks, but ultimately, Ohio navigates by trusting its instruments and hoping the math holds. And through all of this, the crew maintains operational readiness: missile drills, damage control drills, fire drills, battle stations drills, over and over until the movements are automatic and the fear is manageable, because fear is always there. You just learn to function with it. The USS Ohio isn't just a submarine, it's a statement. When it first deployed as an SSBN in 1981, Ohio represented the most credible leg of America's nuclear triad. Land-based ICBMs can be targeted. Bombers can be intercepted. But a ballistic missile submarine hidden somewhere in the Pacific or Atlantic, that's untouchable. That's the deterrent that makes nuclear war unwinnable. Because even if an enemy destroys every missile silo and every bomber base, the boomers remain. 14 Ohio-class SSBNs, though only 12 are operational at any given time due to maintenance, each carrying 20 Trident II D5 missiles under New START treaty limits, each missile capable of striking targets over 7,500 miles away with 12 independently targetable warheads. Do the math. That's strategic overmatch. That's why the Soviet Union, and later Russia and China, invested billions trying to track and kill American boomers, and largely failed. The conversion of 4 Ohio-class boats to SSGNs in the early 2000s demonstrated the platform's versatility. USS Ohio itself completed conversion in 2006, emerging as SSGN 726, with 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles replacing the Trident tubes. Those Tomahawks provide precision strike capability against land targets up to 1,000 miles away. 2 of the 24 original missile tubes were converted into lockout chambers for Navy SEALs and unmanned underwater vehicles. Imagine SEALs exiting a submarine through a converted missile tube, swimming to shore in hostile waters, conducting a raid, and returning, all while the boat remains submerged and undetected. That's the SSGN mission. The 4 boats, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, Georgia, now represent over 50% of the submarine force's vertical launch capability. They are force multipliers in regional conflicts where nuclear deterrence is overkill, but conventional strike power is essential. But time is undefeated. The Ohio-class SSBNs are aging. The first boats are approaching 40 years of service. Hull fatigue, reactor core aging, systems obsolescence. The Navy is already building the Columbia-class SSBNs to replace them, 12 boats at a projected cost of over $8 billion per submarine. The first Columbia is scheduled to begin deterrent patrols in 2031, with the entire class operational by 2042. At that point, the Ohio SSBNs will be decommissioned and scrapped. The SSGNs face a different fate. Their conversions gave them extended service lives, but they'll retire by the late 2020s. Their strike and special operations capabilities will shift to the Block V Virginia-class attack submarines, which incorporate a Virginia payload module with additional Tomahawk tubes. Different platform, same mission. But here's what remains unchanged: the human element, the 155-person crews who volunteer for this life, who train for years to operate the most complex weapon systems ever built, who accept that for months at a time they will live in a steel tube beneath the ocean with no privacy, limited communication, constant danger, and the knowledge that if something goes catastrophically wrong, help isn't coming. Why do they do it? Ask 10 submariners, you'll get 10 variations of the same answer. Pride. Pride in the mission. Pride in the crew. Pride in being part of something bigger than themselves. One former Ohio sailor summed it up. You endure the deployments because you know what you're protecting. Your family, their families, the whole damn country, really. We're the reason nobody launches. We're the reason the world stays stable. That matters. The secrets we've uncovered today, the cramped living, the medical improvisations, the communication challenges, the emergency protocols, they're not weaknesses. They're proof of what humans can endure when the stakes are high enough. The USS Ohio and her sister ships represent the apex of engineering, yes, but they also represent the apex of human resilience. 155 people choosing to live in conditions most would consider intolerable, doing a job most would consider unbearable, all to maintain a peace most take for granted. The Navy keeps plenty of secrets still. Exact operational depths, specific patrol routes, detailed emergency procedures, launch protocols, and that's appropriate. Some things should stay classified because they protect the mission. But the broader truth is now visible. Life aboard the USS Ohio is harder, stranger, and more demanding than most civilians can imagine. And the men and women who do it are quietly some of the most remarkable people in uniform. As the Ohio-class era winds down over the next 2 decades, those who served on these boats will carry their stories forward. Most will never share the classified details, but they'll remember the hum of the reactor, the taste of recycled air, the sensation of surfacing after 90 days and feeling sunlight again. They'll remember their crewmates, the 154 other people who shared that steel tube and became family in the process. The Columbia class will bring new technology, better systems, improved crew comfort, hopefully, but the mission remains the same. Patrol silently, stay hidden, maintain the deterrent. And the human challenge remains the same. Live beneath the ocean for months, cut off from the world, ready to execute if called upon, but praying you never are. That's the real secret of the USS Ohio. Not the technology, not the weapons, but the people who make it all work. The invisible guardians who ensure the rest of us never have to think about nuclear war because they're out there, somewhere in the deep, making sure it never happens. They are silent, they are patient, and they are still on patrol.